We'll get chairs slowly. You can raise your hand if you need a chair at any moment. Yeah. Curators don't get chairs. Hi everyone, thanks for coming. My name is Lucy Vetterhember. I'm the curator here at the Art Gallery of Southwestern Manitoba, who is so proud to be hosting Prairie Interlace as its third of 4 stops across the prairies. The AGSM is located on Treaty 2 territory, which is the traditional homeland of the Dakota, Dene, Anishinaabe, Cree, Oji Cree people, as well as being the homeland of the Red River Métis, and we thank them for their constant stewardship of this land. Special treat for me today we have much better experts than I to tour you on this show. I'll let them introduce themselves. This is Michele Hardy from the Nickel Gallery and Julia Krueger, an independent curator, who will take you around this show, which I think is many, many years in the making. Please, at any point, if you have any questions, they'll be happy to take them. It's going to be an interactive tour. Anybody who's joining us online, you can type any questions that you have into the comments section from whatever platform you're joining us. And we'll be sure to repeat any questions that happen here for the audiences at home, because this is the only thing they can hear too. Okay?
Great. Thank you so much, Lucy, and thank you everybody for joining us here today, both in person, live, and to anyone at home who's joining us. A big welcome to the Art Gallery of Southwestern Manitoba. It is really wonderful to be here. I've been here since Monday, installing with my colleague Erin Sidorenko, and what a pleasure to work with this terrific team and in this beautiful space, and to learn a little bit about Brandon. You've got a really special place here, so thank you everyone who's made us feel so very welcome. It's really great to be talking about a project that we have been involved in now for several years. You know, we thought that we would start off with just some basics about how the project started, and some of the players, the key players in that project. I guess we should probably say who we are. That would be good. and honestly, this is meant to be interactive, so if there are questions, either through the chat online or you folks here, please don't hesitate to shout out your questions. We can think on our feet. So my name is Michele Hardy, and I'm a curator with Nickel Galleries at the University of Calgary. I have a lifelong passion for textiles. In fact, I went to art school way back in the 80s, thought I would be a textile artist, studied many of the people that we included in this exhibition, but made a left turn and ended up doing museum curation. No regrets, it's been fantastic. But I've been at the University of Calgary now for about 18, 19 years, and it's been terrific. I've really enjoyed Calgary, and I've got a great job.
And I'm Julia Krueger, and I'm an independent curator. I do this in addition to another job. I work for the Saskatchewan Arts Board, which is the provincial funding body in the province of Saskatchewan. But I just do that as my day job, and then I do these types of projects in the evening. I specialize in craft theory and history, and I mainly do ceramics projects. But I sort of, in the process of researching the ceramic projects that I've done, I've come across these certain names that intersect. And so I was really interested in trying to tease out the story of what was happening in terms of fiber on the prairies.
Yeah. For anybody that might have seen the Jack Sears show, that was Julia and Timothy.
Yep.
The third curator, who is invisible today, is Timothy Long. Timothy Long is the head curator at the Mackenzie Art Gallery in Regina, and we're really going to borrow Timothy's story in order to sort of launch this event today. A number of years ago, in fact in 2014, the Mackenzie was gifted a fabulous textile that is not in this show. And it's not in this show because it's simply too ginormous. It was a 24-panel tapestry woven by Kaya Sonoma Harris. It was made in 1983, approximately, in the 80s. And it was made specifically for the foyer of the TD Bank Tower in Toronto, a building that was designed by Mies van der Rohe. So an epic modernist building in the heart of the Toronto financial district.
Think Mad Men when we say mid-century modern.
Yep.
We all watched
Yep.
the HBO show
Yep.
Mad Men, so 1950s cool
Yep.
type of interiors, lots of smoking, that type of thing.
Probably not anymore.
No, not anymore, but back then.
Yeah, back then. A really beautiful but spare, even sterile space that they wanted to initially bring in some vibrancy, some life, some warmth. And are we? And I'll just
Keep rattling.
and they wanted to bring some warmth into that.
after many, many years, they decommissioned the tapestry and looked for a new home for that thing and approached the Mackenzie Art Gallery. Do you want to say what happened next?
Well, it came to the Mackenzie, and it basically was so big that it's sat in their vaults waiting for an opportunity to come out and be studied. And that was one of the impetus for starting this show, was wanting to find a reason for it to be displayed. Yeah.
So you can imagine 24 panels, each one approximately, what is that, about 36 inches wide by about 4 yards high. Switched 4 yards, 4 meters, yards, big, 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 big. I work in a tremendously large art gallery in Calgary. We could only display half of the work. They're just so big. Obviously with this space, although there's lots of wall space, not a lot of ceiling height, so we couldn't show it here. But the show will be in Regina in November, so if you can join us again, you'll see the piece there. The arrival of that work really got Timothy thinking about what other textiles were out in the community, what else was going. He and Julia had, I think, quite thoroughly explored the story of clay in Regina and beyond, done a number of exhibitions, a number of publications, but textiles was a new area. And so Timothy reached out to Julia reached out to me, and the three of us put together this project to look at really the history to a certain extent, but to really try and examine what was being done by fiber artists across the Prairie provinces. And go figure, a lot was happening. A lot was happening in Brandon, in Winnipeg, in Regina, in Prince Albert. We'll talk more about Prince Albert, Calgary, and of course at the Banff Centre. And really what we eventually uncovered were so many names, so many stories, so many different kinds of textiles that we had to make some really difficult decisions because you can't show it all. We've said from the beginning that this particular project is inherently incomplete, that we hope to jumpstart new research into this area. So if we haven't included quilting or embroidery or knitting, we're sorry. But again, there was a wealth of choices that we had to make. Should we talk about
The themes.
The themes,
yeah.
Right, the themes. Do you want to?
You start, because you
wound
had
me up. Wound me up. So after surveying, we'll talk about COVID too. After surveying what was going on across the Prairie provinces, we realized that we had to make choices not only about media, but to try and determine some themes to help bring some sense to the exhibition. And so after conducting that survey, we came up with the elemental landscape, thinking about how important landscape is, and in particular that horizon line. On the prairies, I did not grow up on the prairies. I grew up in Vancouver, where the horizon line, your relationship to sort of sky and ground is very different, and have really come to appreciate how that shapes art made on the prairies in textiles and other media. So that was the first one. The second one was
Working on and off the grid.
working on and off the grid, and that was really an opportunity to explore how experimental weaving was becoming. Yes, there were weavers, and we'll talk about some of the very traditional weavers creating beautiful, technically outstanding pieces of cloth on the loom, but more and more weavers were discarding, maybe manipulating their weaving or discarding the loom altogether in order to create three-dimensional textiles. The next theme was body politics. Of course, what was happening in the 60s and 70s was a lot of unrest, a lot of agitation, a lot of burning bras, as women were entering the workforce and really claiming a space for themselves as artists. And then the final one was
Soft politics.
soft power. And this was an opportunity to look at how textiles create place, create space, and were often used through the period to soften modernist buildings, to take up space, to claim identity, And really, it was an opportunity for many people, including Kaya Sonoma Harris, to work big, to work monumentally. And again, when we think about that 24-panel tapestry inside a Mies van der Rohe building, it's quite phenomenal.
You wouldn't have that picture of that.
Well, we don't have that textile, but we do have a smaller one by the same artist, and we'll show you that. And we should mention at the outset that this is a multi-pronged, can you hear me okay? A multi-pronged project where there's the traveling exhibition, but there's also going to be a publication coming out this fall, and there's a fabulous website, if I do say so myself.
And there's a
ourselves.
picture on there.
And there's pictures of the tapestry, both in situ, in the Mies van der Rohe building, and so far pictures of it at the Nickel. So lots of pictures. It's spectacular.
Do you want me to do the COVID story?
Yes,
Okay,
please.
you're all probably sick of it, but we'll tell you this anyways. So we got the funding. This project is funded in part through the Museums Assistance Program, which is with the federal government. So we got the funding for it, and then COVID hit. And one of the first things that happens in a show like this, and it's often when I get hired as an independent curator, is it's my job to go out and find the work. Because the work isn't just always in one particular art gallery's vault. You have to go around to different public collections as well as private collectors. So you can imagine everything shut down, which meant then that it was really hard to gain access to be able to see these works. And because a lot of these works had never been exhibited before, or were exhibited, let's say, maybe 40 years ago, there weren't good pictures of them. People didn't even really know what they had because everything was rolled up and hidden away. So it was quite a challenge. And so in part also what you're seeing here is the work that we were able to gain access to. There's a lot more out there, but in some cases people weren't comfortable with us coming into their homes, or the different institutions were just completely shut down and they weren't able to gain access to those sort of mystery pieces that were all rolled away. But it really did highlight also some of the challenges involved with studying textiles, especially large textiles, because I mean, just imagine how heavy this piece here would be for those of you who make beds. Right? If you've got a really big heavy quilt, that weighs quite a bit. That's like, I don't know, 10 times a quilt weight. And so even if there is one person who was allowed to work during COVID in that space, they weren't able to get that piece pulled up so that we could take a look at it. So what we ended up here with a lot of is actually government collections. There was some access to those, as well as some really great supportive galleries that were able to help us in there, as well as private collections and artists who had work. We have Elaine Rounds with us here today, who's in this show, and we were lucky enough that she had a piece still in her own private collection that we were able to access. So should we start talking about the work?
Sure.
Yeah?
Where
Yeah.
should we start?
Should we start with the land, elemental landscape? Yeah.
So you can either pivot or you can slide over this way.
Do you want me to bring your chair?
Just wave at us. You go ahead.
Okay. So we talked about how important the land is and that horizon line. And this is another one of the key artists who was actually instrumental in us wanting to do this show. And this is the work of Pat Adams. And he did a whole series of these landscapes where he was looking at a very specific moment in time. So these pieces are as much about weaving and manipulation as color as they are about memory. So for instance, this piece is called Prairie Sunset. And then this one up above is called Remember That Sunset That We Saw Here One Time, and he's put it inside. And for us, what's really interesting also about this is all of a sudden this looks so much like the windows and layers of windows that we have in our technology today, where you have layers upon layers of pictures that you swipe and minimize and all that. So it's almost like he was making these in the 1980s, but they are so relevant today. He no longer weaves.
this type of work. He doesn't weave at all currently, but he did transition into weaving Métis sashes because he's a Métis artist as well. So he moved into doing some sash work as well before he's retired now. So that's the work of Pat Adams, which is just really inspirational for us. And it plays really well with Elaine Rounds' work. So you have this piece, this group of 4 over here, this quartet. And this is called Prairie Twill Seasons, and it's ode to spring, summer, fall, and winter. And it's twill because that's the type of weave that this is. Twill is a type of weave. How many weavers do we have? Okay, so we should talk a little bit about that when we come up to it then. If you had all put up your hand and said weavers, then we wouldn't be saying what twill is because you'd be all like, oh, we know already, Julia. So that's a type of weave that's happening here. So if you come and take a close look, you can actually see the difference between these two, and you can see the twill. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, Michelle, twill is also what jeans are woven with. So your denim jeans are a twill weave. So it's a very popular weave that's actually almost on you every single day. But Elaine has used it here in a very poetic way to once again talk about the changing seasons, this place on the prairies that has that really particular light and feel to it that I don't think until you slow down and take time to appreciate, you can't. It's something that us prairie people know about. So yeah, does that...
Can we ask Elaine to comment on the color palette? Is that fair?
Can we put you on the spot?
I did a series of these weavings in smaller sizes, and I had a show in Portage la Prairie, and I did every month of the year. So I think I would fall in the category of when I first came to Brandon, and I came from Colorado, I found the prairie really flat and kind of boring, and made comments that lots of people do, and then fell in love with it. And there are so many seasonal color changes, so I would go out and sketch, and in particular look for, you might find burgundy in fall. There's lots of things that if you're looking really hard, you see in a way that the prairies taught me a lot about looking and about how we see things, and looking at things in depth. So.
Really beautiful. And actually a common comment amongst many of the artists, we didn't mention this, that a number of them were new to Canada.
Mm-hmm.
There's weavers from Lithuania, from Latvia, from the UK, a number from the States, who similarly sort of experienced the prairie like I did. I'm so glad. But over time, begin to see the beautiful colors, limited palette though it may be, and see the integrity and the beauty of that.
Right. I also did these as small pieces that people could fit easily into their homes. And so to go big was really interesting to me too. And when you were talking about the 24 panels, I did a set of weavings for office here in Brandon, and I did 6 panels. So 24 seems really daunting to me.
Yeah. Even logistically, where do you meet those? Right. Yeah.
So should we move over to talking about experimentation?
Let's talk about experimentation. So what else was happening in the 70s was this break from modernism, and this isn't coming out right. But anyway, this embracing of experimentation. We talk about how weavers had woven traditionally, and we have some beautifully woven cloth in the exhibition, but they were also stepping back from the loom or investigating different kinds of techniques, different ways of making cloth, and of expressing things that were important to them. The elephant in the room, quite literally, is Catherine Dickerson's West Coast tree stump. It was suspended at the nickel. Alas, we couldn't suspend it here because we would pull the ceiling down. So we had to find a new way to hold it up. It actually has sort of furniture inside, but it is just a huge piece. Catherine wove it in an outdoor studio on her farm was a cedar stump that had been burnt, it had been cut down and had burn marks in it. And so she sort of mimicked that particular piece with jute and burlap and wool and many other materials, not necessarily considered precious materials, but really evocative of the sort of the spongy bark of trees on the west coast.
And now you're probably thinking, whoa, 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 Julie and Michelle, this is prairies. This is West Coast, right? Well, first of all, one of the things I love to do is as soon as I put a limit on something, I like to break it. So you'll also notice in here that there's works that were made after 2000. And this is another case where we're sort of breaking that boundary, but it's because Catherine Dickerson was a very important teacher who lived half of the time in BC when she wasn't teaching, and the other half of the time when she was teaching in Calgary at the Alberta College of Arts. So, and she actually trained a lot of weavers of subsequent generations. So we included this piece because it's sort of one of her, like, you know, seminal pieces, but it also speaks to that fact that across Canada, there's all of these different types of interwoven connections. And I think that's what you can see with that work as well. So should we move into the space a little bit more? Yeah? Yep.
So let's head around.
Okay.
Some important things.
Sure. Or do we want to, yeah, and then we'll do materials. How does that sound? And the materials, and I'll pass them around.
Oh, yes, sure.
Yeah.
So do spend time with the tree stuff. It's just a fabulous piece. One of the really wonderful things that we were able to do is invite artists to come to openings, meet with the artists. And in the case of Catherine Dickerson, she hadn't seen the piece since she sold it to the art bank in the 70s. Even for adult children who had never seen the piece. Sure, Mom, sure. You made this great big tree stump.
That
But
people
there it
could
was.
go in. We should tell you, it's actually designed for you to go in it, but the opening's been sewn shut because museum rules, we can't have you go into it. So, but, so imagine too that you could actually go inside it, like a little chipmunk or something could. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a favorite. Do you want to hand it down?
Yeah, so while we're talking about all these different materials, we thought it would be good for you to have a chance to feel the difference between them, because one of the things with craft that's really important is that it entertains or engages with senses beyond the visual. Sometimes paintings are mainly a visual art, but craft, there's other things. So we had just talked about Catherine Dickerson's jute piece, so I'll pass this around so you can get a sense of just how scratchy and itchy that would have felt like. So you can pass that around just to get a sense of it. And then following that, we're going to pass around this very luxurious piece of rabbit fur. And that's what these two works are made out of. So I want you to just imagine the difference and the contrast in pushing beyond that idea that weaving can just be made of wool or cotton, and that there's other things that can be used as well. So this is the work of Anne Ratt. So again, sort of imagine, you know, how beautiful and lush this would be. These mats have fur on both sides of them. And when we first looked at these pieces, we had no idea how they were made. These belong in the Sask Arts collection, and they were sort of a mystery to us. And through some research by one of our curatorial assistants, Bailey Montebraten, it was discovered that what it is, like we learned, that what it is that strips of rabbit fur like that, so you can also see how big rabbit fur isn't very big, how many rabbits you would need. Strips of rabbit fur cut very thin, and then you rub them in your hand, and it causes the fur to sort of spin on itself. And so then it creates almost like a thread that has fur on both sides. And then these are crocheted with a finger hook technique. So they're done just with your finger, and they're crocheted, and they're the puffiest, beautifulest, most luscious things. And this was a northern technique, a northern Prairie, Saskatchewan technique that was used to make coats mitts, and hats as well. So if you could just imagine again that feeling of that rabbit fur on both sides. So we go from sort of the scratchy and itchy macrame inspired to these really beautiful, luscious pieces. And these were made for a cooperative to be sold, and Sherry Farrell-Rissette, who's written something an essay in the book that's going to be published, talks about how these were possibly maybe an experimental mat for the southern market, trying to figure out how to take this very traditional technique, modernize it in some way so that it could be something that could be sold.
One of the things we were really sensitive to in the exhibition was the fact there are various communities of weavers. There's histories perhaps more of the settler communities, not as much has been written on Indigenous communities. So we were really pleased to locate some beautiful textiles that spoke to modernism and sort of fit with the exhibition premise. Sorry, really well. And we have more to share about some of those works in just a few minutes. But I do want to show you another really experimental piece. This is by at the time, a Winnipeg-based artist, Susan Barton Tate. And it's a fantastic piece made out of, anybody guess? It was big in the 70s. Wool and dog hair. Do you remember that? Do you remember people making things with?
Actually, I made things that were Ethiopian textured.
Yeah. It was a thing. My mom's neighbors actually had Samoyed dogs, and we kept all the hair and made things from it. Susan Barton Tate had a dog named Nepenthe. The piece is named after the dog, and it's woven, and you can see the structure beneath at the top. But then there's all this beautiful sort of pile work. It's knots onto the loom, and then there's these sort of tendrils that have been stuffed and woven back into themselves to make this really wonderfully textured piece. No, it doesn't smell. It's very rich. It's really beautiful. And another COVID story, we had to wait for the ice to melt or the other way around before we could get the piece from her cabin. Susan made some other very experimental pieces that have since disappeared. What was the big installation?
Northern Lights in the Manual Life building, I believe, on Broadway in Winnipeg. I think that was the name of the building. Yeah, and we're still looking for that piece. So it was, yes.
Can you guys try sharing Julia's mic?
Yeah, sure. Oh, well, you were talking, so.
Oh, I was talking. Yeah, so yeah, in a number of cases, the really big artworks that were installed in public spaces got renovated out, so to speak, and so they've been lost. And they might still be in existence, but they might also have just been disposed of, unfortunately. Sometimes textiles are understood as furniture rather than as art. It's just sometimes how it is, and so it can be sort of difficult. Yes? Oh.
I've had that happen. I've had some of my pieces disappear when they were in offices. When they renovated it, they just discarded them. Mm-hmm. And sometimes they were retrieved by someone who worked in the building and liked them, and others were just gone. We don't know where they are.
Yeah, and that's not an uncommon story. And again, I think it's in part because there needs to be more shows like this that then can sort of explain to people that, hey, this stuff is actually pretty cool. And it's a little bit different than maybe that beat up office chair that you're currently sitting on, right? And so that's sort of the idea behind the show, is to start to get the public aware of these works and get some excitement going on it.
So little written. So little written about so many of these artists. That, you know, it's a moment to document these things before the memories and the pieces are just lost forever. We've told this story in many other contexts where we met with an artist who, again, is not in this exhibition, but an artist named Brenda Campbell shared her portfolio, a portion of her portfolio, page after page after page of images of public commissions, large textile works for office buildings, mainly in Calgary. Those have all just disappeared. And of course, the knowledge of her work will disappear with the artist.
So it's sad. It's really sad. Yeah. Shall we move on to some of the superstars?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay, so we're gonna head over this way.
Sort of here.
The
Is
mute
it-
button
Is
got,
it working again?
yeah, the mute button got smacked. at
Oh,
some
okay,
point,
okay.
so, yeah.
Oh, now I have two. Fingers crossed, yeah.
I'll go to this side.
Yeah, I think we had to talk about Rousseau Vermette.
Okay, so there's a couple of, if we go with the idea of big names in the show, there's a couple of big names in the show, although in my opinion, they're all big names. We just gotta get them to be big names, so to speak. But this is Mariette Rousseau Vermette. And she's one of the sort of more well-known weavers in Canada. There was a biennale called the Lausanne Biennale, which was a really important biennale that happened in Lausanne.
Through the 60s in Lausanne. Yep.
Yeah, in Lausanne, Switzerland. Lausanne, Switzerland. And Canada had representation there. And Mariette Rousseau Vermette was there in 62, 65, 67, and 71. We have another artist who's connected to Winnipeg, Charlotte Lindgren, that we'll look at the very end, who was also in the Lausanne Biennale. So, but how Mariette Rousseau Vermette is connected to the Prairies is through Banff. So the Banff Center had a weaving program, a fiber program, for a number of years, and she ran it.
Yep.
And was very instrumental.
It actually started in the 40s as a place that taught very technical, traditional weaving, but with the arrival of Mariette Rousseau Vermette, it completely shifted direction, and she encouraged the artists coming there to learn fibers to really begin to experiment, to go big, basically to go for it and create works of art. She herself had done a number of massive commissions, including the stage curtain for the
National Theater.
the National Arts Center, as well as the Kennedy Arts Center down in Washington, D.C. The baffles at Roy Thompson Hall, she collaborated with Arthur Erickson, the architect, on the baffles for Roy Thompson Hall. So some really big commissions. She was not just a weaver, but also someone that could understand architectural drawings. She could negotiate contracts. She was, very, very savvy in her practice. This piece is a really interesting piece to include in the exhibition. It's in the permanent collection of the Banff Center. But the technique that's used is something called boutonnet, and it is a very traditional Quebecois technique. Was traditionally used on coverlets, on sort of decorative textiles. And here she's just done rows and rows and rows of these little raised, they're almost like French knots if you know about embroidery. It's just a little raised button. And she's lined them up, kept the color palette, of course, just creamy, and made a very modernist kind of statement.
Yeah, and when we say modernism, I mean, if I put on my Art History 100 hat, when I teach that class, I talk about these really big paintings by modernist painters. Some of those would include Jackson Pollock, if you know that name, the guy that scribbled the paint all over the floor. Or is that recognizing the name? Or Mark Rothko is another one who just does really calm paintings that you're supposed to look at them, and it almost gives you a spiritual, otherworldly type of experience. And if you think about that in terms of those types of really big paintings that were coming out, that are stripped down to their bare essentials. And what I mean by that is it's about the material, and it's about the shape, and it's about the composition. We have it right here. We have it all right here. Like, this is as modernist as you can get. And if you take the time to look at it, you can start to understand it in a universal way. That's this idea of the universal appeal of modernism. It's not about making a picture about something else. It is about weaving. It is about the material, and it's about an aesthetic experience. So very much so, the women included in this show were right working and making stuff alongside the painters. And to me, in some ways, with that haptic quality that we just talked about, the feeling of the touch, there's a whole other level to these that's beyond the visual that you see with the paintings. My little spiel there. Okay.
Good, thank you.
So,
Lucy, you will keep us on track time-wise.
yeah.
Okay. So we promised you a work by Kaya Sonoma-Harris, and this is the piece that we could travel to Brandon, as opposed to the 24 panels, which was far too large. It's a really beautiful piece. It's a really good indication of the color palette that she frequently used and how skillful she was at blending colors. Should we pass around my lovely assistant will bring some samples. Kaya was born in Finland, and she immigrated to Saskatoon, if I'm not incorrect there, and set up her studio. In fact, I ran into someone recently who used to babysit for her kids, and she used to pay this babysitter with pieces of cloth. Where were we?
You can elaborate on one of those that will then pass.
Well, I don't know how much more I can say, but these are just these delightful little rounds, coasters perhaps. They're crocheted, so it's different technique, but it gives you a sense of how effective she was at blending colors. And these were made quite recently.
Yeah, those are quite recently. The idea when we're saying blending colors is that you'll see it with Pat Adams, with a number, if you just go down the list, as opposed, let's say, to Rousseau Vermette, who's just using one strand of color. If you come up close and look at these, as you can see in the samples that are going by, it's not just one color of thread that's put together. There's a number of colors to give that sort of painterly quality to the work. And again, just so that you can get a sense of what wool feels like in comparison to the other two materials that we just looked at here. So the scarf that's going around is woven, and then the little sort of trivets that she made later in life are crocheted.
I think we should,
35 minutes? Okay.
yep, I think we should maybe head around the corner here.
Yeah, okay, so we're gonna get up and do another round around the corner.
We could speak from here. How about right over here? Yeah, at 3 o'clock we'll have chair yoga.
So lots of experimentation going on in this particular corner of the exhibition. You passed, and please go back and have a long look at that fabulous tapestry in the back corner. It's woven by Ilse Agnes Selkakis. She was a Lithuanian, born in Lithuania, came to Berlin, and eventually immigrated to the US and Canada. She continues to make textiles in Cochrane, Alberta.
And it's made of leather.
And that piece is made out of leather. So she actually learned to weave with Catherine Dickerson of the Tree Stump. But after she graduated from school, she didn't really want to weave anymore, still wanted to make textiles, and began to upcycle these beautiful pieces of leather that she found. And I mean, we're so glad that she did. It's a really luscious, beautiful tapestry made with something that we might not expect, with pieces of cowhide. We should also talk about this Hazel Schwass.
Yeah, so the two pieces that you see next both have, in some ways, Manitoba connections. The one with the wood is by a lady named Gail Platts, and she had a weaving center store in Winnipeg called Frolicking
Fantasies.
Yep. And her and her colleague had a show at the WAG at one point. So there's the Manitoba connection there. The next one over is by Hazel Schwass, and Hazel Schwass was trained through the Cyril Weaving Company, and that was a weaving training. The Cyril Grain Company had a weaving program that went across the prairies, and as long as there was a Cyril grain terminal elevator in the community, they would ship the looms as well as the sort of training manuals there. And there was a whole process that you could go through to learn how to weave very sort of more traditional types of objects, like let's say tablecloths or placemats. And so she went through that program and then went on to attend workshops at Banff as well as at various places around Saskatchewan, and started to be more experimental. The piece that you see on this side is by the Crafts Guilds of Manitoba, and it's a collaborative piece that was made after, and I can't remember his first name, it's probably on the label. Ken. I know his last name because it's Weaver, and I think that's like, haha, he's a Weaver and his last name's Weaver. So, you know, those are the things.
I was in that workshop.
You were in the workshop. There, so
You didn't make a barnacle.
And I didn't get to participate in this, but I did a long piece.
What I did during the class was about 6 to 8 feet long and about 12 inches wide. Mine was all in autumn colors, like rust, browns, grays, yeah. It was very exciting to be in that class.
And Ken Weaver was a student of Larson.
Jack Leonard Larson.
Jack Leonard Larson. So again, in the weaving world, that's a really sort of a big name. He
Yeah.
published a book, he curated a number of shows of this sort of weaving that's being pulled off the wall, off of tables into the more experimental realm. So we included this piece in part 2 because to give a nod to just how important these community networks were at this point in time, as just as Elaine said now, she was also there. It was very exciting. And so we've included this piece. It's called Prairie Barnacles. It's just sort of got that, you know, it reminds me of when you go out and walk in the prairies and there's all the lichen that are on rocks. I mean, it's got some of those exact colors and that sort of, you know, raised appearance that the lichen gives you. So that's why that one's there.
We had artists that came to the opening at the Nickel who went through the names of all the participants and said, she was my neighbor, I remember her, she was another neighbor, which is really, really wonderful.
Yeah.
So this is a fantastic piece by an artist named Eva Heller. We borrowed it from the Alberta Foundation for the Arts, who've been very good, like Sask Arts, been very good about collecting textiles. They could collect more, but anyway, they have some important pieces. Eva Heller was from Poland, and what's significant about that is that in Poland, she was, at least for part of the time, a student of the very famous textile artist Magdalena Abakanowicz. Not a name that might roll off your tongue, but someone who really rocked the art world in the 70s. She came out of Poland, she was showing at the Lausanne Biennials, she had a big exhibition, I think it was in Chicago, but it toured across Canada. Michele was just a little young art student who drove to Montreal to see Magdalena's exhibition, and it's like she changed everything. Everything that we thought about fiber, our approach to fiber, and what it could do. Some of that is distilled into this particular piece by Eva Heller. She was in Edmonton, Lethbridge, and then Edmonton. She had a smallish loom, always a limiting feature for weavers. But nevertheless, she created this really interesting shaped tapestry with these sort of open holes. Again, is popular in fashion again, all these holes. And then this sort of, I don't know what it is, a burning eye in the middle.
It's about heat, summer heat.
It's about summer heat.
Yeah, when I spoke with her, she talked about how, again, on the prairies, that shimmering when you're driving on the highway that you get when it's really, really hot from the asphalt. So it's some of that that's happening, those effects that you see here. So that's what that piece is about.
Yeah.
And then we have that opposite, Winter Sun. So a really cool work by Catherine Miller, who's out of Saskatchewan. Just, again, that really crisp, think 40 below weather, and it's just that crisp day and you're walking in the sun, the sun's beating down, but it's really cold and the snow is crunching. And so that's that. So sort of again, these ideas of the elemental landscape that we saw in Elaine's piece as well, the differences in the changes in the seasons.
Just a funny little side note, we borrowed this piece and took it to a textile conservator who gave it a really good wash. It's very hard to see, but it was impossible before. She actually signed the work in the bottom right-hand corner. So again, it speaks to a different kind of relationship with what you're making. This is an art object. It's not a placemat. So go up and have a quick look for the signature. Should we
move into here?
Yep, should we move or should we just talk from here?
Why don't we talk from here, and then when we go through, you can take a look. How does that sound? So we did talk about themes, and we've sort of moved through this idea of elemental landscape and on and off the grid. The next section in here is sort of loosely based on body politics. So they're works that have to do with the body. So we've got a number of pieces. There's one in the corner by Margriet van Walsum, who was a very important teacher in Saskatchewan. She actually encouraged Aganitha Dick, who you're going to see on the floor here, to explore textiles. And Aganitha is, of course, a Manitoba artist now, but Aganitha was for a couple of years up in Prince Albert, Saskatchewan. And then beside that, we've got this really large macrame that I'm hoping you can all see from there, and it's called Ceridwen.
Ceridwen.
Yeah, and goddess of birth.
Yes.
Yes, rebirth.
Yep.
So again, these ideas of birth and the body, which were all being explored at this point in time by other artists like Judy Chicago and the Big Dinner Party set, if you know about that piece. And then we've sort of got the showstopper in this area, which I think is the most literal to do with the body, maybe with the most literal title in the show, Boob Tree. You can't get more literal than that. So that's Boob Tree. And Boob Tree was included in a show in Winnipeg, and I want to say 1974, but we should go look to make sure my date is right. So 1974 was the year of the woman, and the Winnipeg Art Gallery did a show about women in art. However, the majority of the work that was included in that show was by men who were depicting women.
Go figure.
So problematic. And a number of women artists at the time found that problematic as well. So there was a little bit of a debate that happened, but eventually the concession was that there would be a gallery space in the WAG that would be put aside for an alternative show. And that alternative show was work by women to celebrate the Year of the Woman. It was a work by women, about women, for women, etc. And Boob Tree was one of the pieces that was included in that show. It was featured on the cover of the catalog as well as on the posters. And the funny story that we found out is that these posters were put up around Winnipeg, and then it became a thing to steal them. And so they were like just constantly being stolen, and people started collecting them, and it was a whole like thing at that point in time. So anyways, and again, I mean, it begs, that piece very, very much begs to be touched. And that's happening in part because of the textileness and the squishiness that you wouldn't get, let's say, if that piece was made of bronze, right? It gives you a very different type of feel, but we're not going to touch it. You have to just imagine what it would be like. So we'll make our way through, and as we go through, we're gonna maybe stop over by the rugs over there?
Yep, and Nudegate. We should talk about Nudegate.
Yeah, so we're going to go over there. Michelle and I will make our way over there, and we'll stop there for the next one. As we go by, you can take a look at this little dye sample here, which shows some of the dyes that and colors you can achieve from prairie plants. I'm just going to help with the chair if you want to.
Oh, yeah.
So just follow Michelle over.
So as you're heading this way, do have a look at Boob Tree, and also at Close Knit, which is this large sculptural piece in the middle of the floor. Those are 65 woolen sweaters that Aganitha felted with the help of a wringer washer. They're not child sizes, they're actually adult sizes, but they've shrunk very, very small. The title of the piece is Close Knit, and it's a reference to the fact that these are knitted sweaters, of course, to families, to family ties, but also to the movement of people. And Aganitha has talked about her family having to flee, what country was it? had to flee from their original European home, and this sort of movement of people through time and space. And, you know, of course, we've heard many stories, and still we hear stories about people having to flee their countries with just the clothes on their back. And so it's a really, really poignant piece. So that's close-knit. And of course,
Yeah, we'll move in here.
Yep, we're going to
a
move
little
in
bit
here.
more.
Yep.
Good spot right here.
Yeah, we could sort of do this whole area.
Okay.
Yeah.
So like over here then?
Yeah.
Right here. There we go.
It's a good thing you have spinny chairs. You just spin in place. Yeah. It's a lot to take in.
Are you doing the rugs first?
I think we should start with Anne Newgate.
Okay.
Yeah. So again, come on in, don't be shy, but do have a look over your shoulder at that fantastic tapestry that's on the white wall there. This is a work by Anne Newgate, and I'm going to get the title wrong.
Oh, I won't remember it.
Yeah,
Let
if
me
you
go
would-
read it, because it's very long.
Anne Newgate was originally from South Africa, is originally from South Africa. What's it called, Julia?
National Identity, Borders, and the Time Factor, or Wee Manny.
Yes. And so she emigrated to Canada, was living in Saskatoon, spent time up in Prince Albert with some of these other fabulous weavers that we've mentioned, and really began to investigate tapestry. In fact, she traveled to
Edinburgh.
She traveled to Edinburgh. I've forgotten the name of the school, but she went to perfect her craft, and specifically to work on translating her drawings and collages into weaving. Unfortunately, in this exhibition, we couldn't include the drawing of this piece, but to see the drawing beside the tapestry is absolutely mind-boggling. The way she captured the texture of the paper, the colors of the paper is really, really, I mean, hats off. She's just an amazing craftsperson. She still is. She's still, I think she's still practicing weaving, although she lives on one of the Gulf Islands. I've forgotten which one, but she lives on Gulf Islands. And there's a wonderful, wonderful interview with Anne Newgate on the website. So please do check out the website. We purposefully positioned it next to particularly the Harrison rug behind Haley, because they're both narrative pieces and they both speak to the idea of identity. Anne Newgate was very aware of the situation of politics in South Africa, and moved to Saskatchewan and became very aware of the politics of Indigenous people in Canada. And so she was thinking about a lot of these things as she was weaving. The Margaret Harrison piece is by Métis rug hooker Margaret Harrison, based in Saskatchewan. And this piece has a great story. Do you want to tell it?
How we got it?
Yeah, how we got it.
Yeah, so it's one of the pieces that's breaking the date, the date rule, so it's from about circa 2005. And one of the reasons is because Margaret Harrison's rugs are with people. It was really hard to find one that we could have in the show. Not only are they in homes being loved and cherished by people, there are also a number of them are in shows. And so it turned out this was an amazing one because it depicts her where she grew up. In a road allowance community in Saskatchewan. So it's got a really great story to it as well. So it ended up being amazing. It's got along the edges the flowers, which are more typical of Métis hooked rugs. But this piece was in a show up until 2 days before Prairie Interlace opened. And in the museum world, that's normally a no-go. You need, let's say a month. You have to put the works into a refrigerator, or a freezer, to make sure that they don't have bugs in them, so you kill all the bugs. You need to have it photographed, you need to have the conservator look at it.
Paperwork.
There's a lot, it's a very slow process, but we were able to negotiate going and getting this piece. So we had to drive to Motherwell Homestead where the piece was up take it off the wall early. They allowed us to, and drive it directly to Calgary to get it into the show.
Quickly sew it.
Yeah, quickly sew
Put
it.
it on the wall.
Make sure everything was good and put it up. So, I mean, we're so glad it was
Yep.
here, but it was one that
Yep.
it took some time. Again, because it's just, a lot of these works, or a number of these works are also in demand. And
Yeah.
it's just, hard to find ones that can be in a show for whatever reason. I think next to them is a group of latch-hooked rugs.
I'm gonna
And-
get samples.
Okay, you'll get samples. Okay, so in addition to weaving, we've included this expanded frame, which is this idea that we've got some other types of techniques like macrame that you saw with Ceridwen over in the body politics area, crochet like you saw with boob tree, and then we've also got two types of rug making techniques here. So both the Margaret Harrison and the Florence Ryder here are called hooked rugs, and so we've got an example here that we'll pass around where the material, often it's strips of clothing, used clothing that have been cut, are just sort of looped and hooked into it, versus the 5 that you see in the middle here are latch hook, and that's where you've got a short piece of yarn that is knotted to sort of like a burlap or a
It's
grid
canvas.
like material.
Think Michaels, think
yeah.
kits.
Yeah.
But
And-
these are not kits.
Yes, and so these pieces are part of, that came out of a cooperative called the Sioux Handicraft Cooperative out of Standing Buffalo. And it was a project that started in the late 1960s where elders would create patterns, and then the other members of the cooperative would draw it onto the canvas that you see there, draw the patterns on, and then latch hook them with various types of colors and wool. And so you can see here an updating of traditional geometric motifs coming out of Lakota, Dakota histories. And so we've included a number here for you to look at. And this is, again, we're in this soft power theme now. So the idea of taking these really gorgeous rugs and putting them into a place and sort of, marking a space for these types of decorative motifs in a particular building. So yeah, so that's the group there. Then we also have a couple of other examples here. So once again, we've got the hooked rug above with the welcome, followed by underneath the latch hook that says, I know people are stealing my things. And both of these rugs are playing off on the idea of the welcome mat. So the one at the bottom is made by Cindy Baker, and she made a series of welcome mats that maybe are not for people who aren't necessarily welcome. So that's the idea of that, right? People put welcome mats in front of their house, but that doesn't necessarily mean everybody's welcome to come inside, right? There's sort of a really strange thing when you start to think about it. So that's Cindy Baker's underneath. The one up above is, again, another one breaking our time constraints. This piece is actually from 2022 by a lady named Nancy Kreitz, and it is a second part to a work that will only be seen in Regina. In the early 1990s, she made that welcome mat out of condoms during the height of the AIDS crisis. And she wanted to do that for a couple of reasons. One of them was to destigmatize condoms, including with her children. So she bought about 1,000 pink and blue condoms, and she had her children wipe the lubrication off of them to get them used to condoms. But again, this idea of being welcome into one's body. And what that means, or being welcome to come close. And so the piece that's made of condoms has basically now become this crystallized, sort of really delicate thing that if you touch it, the now hardened latex condoms just shatter. So it's not here. But instead, what she did was she made this new welcome one during COVID, where again, it started to be that idea of, how many people were welcome into other people's homes during this time when we at first didn't know what all was involved. You know, how could we protect each other? When was one welcome? When was one not welcome? And so this idea sort of, she rethought of it, and this time made it into, made it out of textiles, which she's currently working in now, not in condoms. And so it's a more publicly accessible work. And it really speaks to, during the late 1990s, again, that idea of experimental work in textiles. She made a number of pieces out of plastic. I don't know if she made toilet paper, but other type of material like that that just didn't survive. Should we close with
Yeah,
Charlotte Lindgren?
if we can, let's do the last two big sculptural pieces. So a late addition to the exhibition, not quite as late as Margaret Harrison, but a late addition nonetheless, was this really wonderful piece by Charlotte Lindgren. Charlotte was, where did she come from again? Was she from the US?
I don't
Julia
know.
will
Sorry.
check. Another immigrant.
No,
to
she was
the-
born in Toronto.
Born in the, okay, well, an immigrant to the prairies. She was really only in Winnipeg for a short time, but that is where she started to learn to weave and to experiment with weaving. This was a piece that she made after, it's another cheat, after she had already left the prairies. She moved to Nova Scotia, where she spent the rest of her life. She's still there. She's living in Cape Breton, not weaving anymore. But she made this piece probably inspired by winter trees, the trees in winter that we see on the prairies, those sort of bold, I think really lacy-like structures that are so evident in the winter. And this is a piece that was woven and then experimented with to create this amazing, amazing shape, beautiful shadows on the wall, and it was included at Expo 67. Now, other groups I've given this tour to, and they say, what the heck was Expo 67? For those of you who might not know, it was, of course, a tremendous cultural event that happened in Montreal in '67, including a number of opportunities to showcase the best of Canadian art and craft. This piece was in it, as were some of the other artists that we may not have mentioned. But it's a beautiful work made with purple yarn, purple wool, and metal, and it's
And woven on the loom in
Yep.
one piece.
Yep, and
So
then seamed.
she said that, you know, it's woven in one piece, and so then she'd take it off and then would, you know, it would sort of come to life. So quite experimental. And what's really important to this work is not only the structure itself, but the shadows in the background, that she really wanted that to sort of play off in this sort of really gentle movement that you see. Again, that, you know, it's a nice winter day, and the gentle movement that you see in the trees as you're going by.
If I'm having a bad day, I just watch videos of this piece, just
Yes.
spinning gently in front of my
Yeah.
eyes. I think the last piece, we could go on and on, but the last piece that we'll talk about is the big red piece that's just around the corner there. And this is a work by Carol Little. In a sense, we've sort of come full circle, because Carol Little was a young student. She learned weaving at the Alberta College of Art with another person we couldn't include in this iteration of the show, but Douglas Motter was a man. He was an immigrant from the States. He taught weaving at Southern Alberta Institute for Technology, which became the Alberta College of Art, and actually founded a hand weaving business in Calgary, where he mentored a number of students, including Brenda Campbell, who we've talked about, and Carol Little. If you look closely at that piece, it has the label of Douglas Motter and Co. That was the company. But his own work was quite flat, quite planar, experimental, but not to the same sense that Carol has taken it. For the weavers, for Elaine, it's a wool cloth. It's warp ikat. It's a really beautiful, subtle piece, but hung to represent the furrows that we see on the prairies. And in fact, that's the name of the piece, is Furrow. So
I think that's it.
that's
So
it.
Thank
Do we
you.
have time for some Q&A? We're at an hour.
Yeah.
Okay. Any questions? Any questions? comments, reflections?
I'll give you a mic. Yeah.
It's just so interesting, and it's, you know, we don't think about the history of textile very often, and so it's nice to be part of all of that. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. It is a history. We you know, we haven't necessarily valued them, nor kept very good records, but it is a history, and it's a really important history. Yeah, yeah. Are there questions from the studio audience? Nope.
Did anybody have a favorite piece? Oh, hey, what was your favorite piece?
My favorite piece is the leather one out in the corner.
Ah, the leather one, the rising from the ashes that was in the corner. Yeah, that's quite,
Yeah.
quite a nice piece. And to think that you could do that with scrap leather.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
She was quite sheepish talking about how she was upcycling, because when she made it, people weren't upcycling. You didn't upcycle in the 80s. You know, secondhand things were kind of ooh. But, you know,
Yeah.
kudos to her for going for it. That piece continues to stay with the artist. It's in her living room ordinarily, and it is the grandchildren's favorite hiding place during hide and seek. So they can touch it, but alas, we won't
Anyone
touch
else
it.
want to share their favorite piece? Push the mic in your face. So I won't, I promise. I can repeat it. Anyone else? Surprises?
Julia Krueger, what's your favorite
Well,
piece?
I have to tell you, so as well as the Pat Adams, back in the early 2000s, I worked at the Canada Council Art Bank, and there was these rumors about this tree stump that was in their collection. That, you know, they knew it was there, nobody had taken it out in years, and so it was another one of those pieces that sat in the back of my mind since then, and I've been like, I'm gonna get this piece out, we're gonna get it shown, we're gonna get it appreciated. And so it was actually great to see it in the flesh, because I'd only ever seen pictures of it, because it takes a number of people to get that piece up and out of the crate. It normally lays flat down, right? Like it just sort of
Yep,
collapses
yep,
down on itself. So that's probably was a highlight to get to see
Yeah.
that piece.
My favorite piece changes every time I see the exhibition. It's like that one, no, that one, no, that one. But
Yeah.
yeah, this one's really special.
Yeah, this was really special to get to hear. The craft exhibition at Expo was a really, really important exhibition for Canadian fine craft, because it sort of started to define what that was. Who were the players across the country that were making some of the work that was, you know, of interest to the curators at that point in time. So for us to get a piece
Yeah.
from that exhibition was
Yeah.
quite exciting.
Came all the way from Prince Edward Island.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
My husband's brother took a photograph of his eyeglasses lying on the coffee table, and the sun was shining through them, and it left a shadow on the table.
There you
And
go.
he won an award for that photograph.
There you go. Art is wherever we are.
Yeah.
Yep. Yep. That's beautiful.
Because there also like the under dress of a princess, you know, for when you turn it.
Like a dress, yeah, if it's turned the other way, yeah.
yeah.
No, so it's interesting how, different ways of looking at abstracted pieces can
Please, yeah.
give different meaning.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think, are there any questions online?
Comment from Susan, amazing exhibition, interesting. There's not a lot of references to our deep winter, which is white, cold, and barren. Ending with the winter tree, but starting with all of this heat.
Yeah. Great.
Good. Thank you so much,
you.
everybody. Thank you to the AGSM. Thank you for everyone who is joining us online and is invisible at the moment. I hope that you come and enjoy the exhibition. Bring your friends, bring your families, check out the website, and buy the catalog when it comes out this fall, because it'll be beautiful.
Oh, and there's a survey to
And there's
do.
a survey.
Yes.
Yep.
The survey helps us out a lot,
Yeah.
so if you can do it, that would be great. Yeah. Great.
Thank you.
We'll take the mics away so they don't pick up conversation.